So good afternoon. My name is Sarah Cordivano, and today I will be talking about building the future of open geodata. So this is a re-recording of my presentation during FOSS4G in San Francisco in March of 2015. So in the spirit of openness, I have made my slides available online, and you can find them at ph.ly/openfuture. You can also follow up with me on Twitter at Mapadelphia. So I'm speaking on behalf of Azavia, and Azavia is a software and analytics company based out of Philadelphia, and we specialize in geospatial data and analysis. So I'm part of the data analytics team, and I'd encourage you to check out the link on our slides to learn more about our team. We help nonprofits and other companies do really interesting and creative things with data, including analysis and visualizations. I also wanted to share some information about the Summer of Maps program. So we have $5,000 fellowships for student GIS analysts, and they work on really interesting projects for nonprofits throughout the summer. So if you're interested in applying for the 2016 program, check out our website at summerofmaps.com. So Azavia has a long interest and history with open data, and I wanted to just show this project we've worked on recently, which is a visualization of energy benchmarking data for the Mayor's Office of Sustainability. So the cool thing about this project is that it makes this data available in a few different formats for download, visualized on a map, and also included in and visualized in different charts and graphics. So it's an interesting way for the public to interact with this data in a few different ways. So the roadmap for the talk today is laid out here. I'm going to start talking about my perspective on open data, a little bit about the past and how we've gotten to do a lot of the interesting things we've done so far, the present situation with open data, and then hopefully we'll take a second to talk about the future and how we as data users and creators can take action to ensure a bright future for open data. So before I start, I wanted to pitch a question to all of you listening, and that's, have you ever had to file a right to know request for a data set from a government? So I just want you to keep in mind how that process went, whether it was smooth or whether it was complicated, whether it was time-consuming or efficient. So with that in mind, I'll start talking a little bit more about my perspective and relationship with open data. So I've had a kind of unique relationship with open data. I started out with in academia with utilizing data for research. I worked in government for a few years, working directly with open data and facilitating right-to-know requests. I currently find myself in a private company, and we utilize data for lots of our projects. And I also serve as a community advocate for open data. So what has that looked like? In academia, I was tasked with analyzing over 250,000 birth record points, which of course were not open data, but it was a great opportunity to bring other open data sets in to support the analysis of this data. At the City of Philadelphia, I served as a gatekeeper to facilitate right-to-know requests, which gave me a keen understanding of the complications and limitations of this process. In the private sector, I integrate open data in Cicero, which is our elective official and district API. So understanding how important the availability and accuracy of open data has really shown its importance to me in the past few years. And finally, advocating on behalf of opening data through my connection with GeoPhilly and the Open Data Institute. So all of these things have helped to give me a lot of different feedback of not only the benefits open data has, but the challenges that city governments really have in releasing quality and accurate data. So in the context of this presentation, I'll be speaking about open data primarily as data released by local state and national governments. And I will have defined the future as the next 3 years. So keep those things in mind as I go through these slides. So first I wanted to talk a bit about the past. So here's a kind of rough timeline of what Philadelphia went through in its process to release open data. In 2003, it began to release data on PASDA, which was a state data repository. However, this focus of this website was primarily for technical professionals, so it really wasn't a resource for the common folk that are just interested in pulling up data quickly for their purposes. In 2011, Open Data Philly launched its first version, which actually served as a really nice tool for open data for city agencies, and I think it was one of the most helpful and resourceful data portals out there at the time. However, still significant effort was being expended to process other data requests outside of what was already available online. In 2012, the mayor passed an executive order on open data, which created a position for a chief data officer. And this actually had a lot of important milestones in progress during this time, but also struggles in universal adoption by civic departments. And by 2014, the city had a full team to support open data initiatives, as well as community engagement around open data. And by 2015, Open Data Philly had relaunched a new version, which included interesting tools for community management, as well as engagement with citizens who are using the data. But what's next? So this is Philadelphia's timeline, but I don't think this timeline is too unusual for other agencies that are seeking to publish data. So the kind of steps that are often taken are initially releasing data for technical practitioners only, continued facilitation of data requests, which of course are inefficient and time-consuming, the publishing of a first version of a data portal, which usually works but is sometimes a bit clunky, and then hopefully this step highlighted in red becomes the tipping point, and that is departmental buy-in and executive investment around open data. So hopefully from that point forward, more substantial progress is being made. So after that, ideally, hopefully data that city agencies collect is being maintained with the intent to release it, which really makes the process of release much more efficient. Improved access mechanisms and data support. So releasing data in not just as a shapefile or not just in a geodatabase, but in multiple formats and delivery mechanisms. And finally, this kind of gold standard of maturity is civic participation to improve the quality of data and availability. So I also wanted to, since we're talking a bit about the past, I wanted to show you how far we've come. So this is a version of the state of Pennsylvania's original data access portal. This is from 1999. So I wanted to just show you how this works here, because I think it's a pretty nice gem of the late 90s web design. So I don't think you can hear the sound right now, but there's lovely sound animation with each one of these steps. And even though that this website looks pretty out of date for today's standards, it actually served as a really important resource to academics and technicians that needed to get their hands on important data from the city of Philadelphia and other Pennsylvania municipalities. So the first version of Open Data Philly was jointly managed by an organization called Access Philly, as well as other members of the data community. And this was a journalist organization that ensured that the data on the website was up to date and had all the necessary metadata that was required. So it was a really good resource, but there's definitely additional resources and tools that would make it more valuable to the public. So the new Open Data Philly, which just launched, was a great improvement because it had a lot of new features. So we'll talk about those now. The current Open Data Philly has, it was funded in part by the Knight Foundation. It's built on CCAN, which is a great platform for open data portals. It catalogs over 260 data sets, but most importantly from different organizations, agencies, and even private corporations. So it's not only data from the city of Philadelphia, it's also from other organizations and nonprofits. And the community supports and helps to manage the data that's being shared, which is nice because then it ensures that there's not just one gatekeeper publishing data. So a few more details about it. There's an active open data Google group, which is a great opportunity to ask questions or clarify the metadata or other information about published data. There's an active Civic hacking organization called Code for Philly, which is a Code for America brigade, which helps to build really fantastic projects that utilize open data. And the city also went as far as to publish a comprehensive inventory of internal data that's not yet published, and hopefully that will ensure that there's a proper pipeline of data sets to be published in the future. So this kind of community around Open Data Philly has been very, very active and very prolific in terms of building really fantastic projects with open data. So here are just some of the few organizations that have active events that support open data and utilize it in their operations. This is one cool project I wanted to highlight. So this was built with Code for Philly, and it is a really fantastic little application that shows opportunity for public gardens and urban agriculture. So it brings together lots of different open data sets that are currently available online, and it lets the user filter and visualize all these different data sets. But as we are now, there's still some shortcomings with open data that are important to recognize. So many open data sets have infrequent or non-existent updates. Many are missing or have incomplete metadata. There's often uneven organizational adoption. So some city agencies might release several data sets where others might not release any. There's always seems to be formatting inconsistencies with the published data formats. So some are published as APIs, some are published as CSVs. So depending on the data set, it can be hard to bring together multiple data sets in one program. And finally, sometimes data is released in closed formats like file geodatabase or SID imagery formats. So hopefully, we are coming to a point where we'll be overcoming a lot of these shortcomings, and we'll work our way towards a better open data utopia. So the future, and that's what this presentation is really about. So I wanted an analytical way to hypothesize what the future of open data might actually look like. So in doing this, I did some research on what other advocates and experts thought the future of open data might look like. I developed a hypothesis of what I thought the future would be, and I surveyed members of the community, and I used that survey results to help me refine my hypothesis. So the structure of the survey was a Google form. The audience for the survey was the Open Data Institute nodes, as well as the Open Data community on Twitter. And the questions I asked were relating to the future based on data standards and quality, consumption and access, and adoption and community, as well as a general request for aspirations community members had for the future of open data. So I received 27 responses, ranging from folks from government agencies, nonprofit advocacy groups, and commercial organizations. And again, as I said earlier, I had defined the future as the next 3 years. And for each of the questions that I asked, I invited the responders to check all the options that they thought applied. So instead of inviting people to only select one option, they were able to select up to as many as they thought were applicable. So on the first topic of data standards and quality, I invited people to give their thoughts on 3 different key predictions for the future. So the first is relating to increased development and adoption of open data standards. So there's a lot of fantastic open data standards out there, but seeing more adoption and development of these standards would be pretty fantastic in terms of making sure that data is available to be combined with other cities and other states, and make sure the formatting is consistent for different published data sets. Next, I thought that integrated data portals, which support regional and national visualized open data sets, would be a fantastic future aspiration. And I wanted to mention the GeoBlacklight tool, which was presented earlier at this application, or at this conference. So definitely check out the GeoBlacklight presentation, because it showed it was a really interesting tool that allows you to define a geographic area and see all the open data sets that overlap with that area. And finally, the increased availability of live data feeds. So more APIs and more data sets that are published linked directly to the databases from which they are maintained. So hopefully those would ensure that the data is more up-to-date and accurate. So from these options, most of the responses in the survey thought that the data standards as well as the live data feeds would be most likely. Some other responses I got were related to data maintenance and the extension of open data beyond government data sets, so the inclusion of nonprofit, academic, and commercial data sets. The questions relating to the consumption and access of data, they started with the aspiration that published data would consistently serve a variety of needs. So publishing data not only as an API or not only as a download, but making it available in multiple formats, as well as a viewer, which is always really important for folks with that have very light data needs and just want to explore the data, but are not interested in building an application or doing any robust analysis of the data. Next, open data serving as a common topic of civic discourse. So political platforms discussing open data during elections, academics and journalists discussing the merits of open data during their conferences and events. And finally, the availability of more tools from both open and closed providers for the publishing of open data. So from these options, open data serving a variety of needs was most popular, with more tools for publishing next, and then finally open data as a topic of civic discourse. A few other topics that people recommended were data published consistently and maintained to encourage continued usage, and open data being used to build and grow new businesses and create jobs. So finally, the last topic that I solicited interest on was related to adoption and community. And the first aspiration for the future was government policies that have power to enforce open data initiatives and goals. Next, governments with dedicated budget and staff for open data initiatives. And finally, third parties with strong investment and advocacy for open data. So that might be journalists or academics, but essentially advocacy for open data coming from a third-party organization other than civic-minded folks. So of these responses, dedicated government budget and staff was the most popular, with A and C, government power to enforce open data, and third-party investment pretty much tied next. So I didn't get any other comments for this, but it sounds like dedicated government budget and staff was pretty important to most responders. So I also wanted to share some of the aspirations that were submitted through the survey. Increased data literacy as well as demystification of data sounded very important. Collaboration for data. open data as a tool to solve real-world problems, APIs that are clean and up-to-date, governments releasing data that might make them look bad. I thought that was particularly poignant. More open source options for publishing data, transparency as strategic operation, which I thought was quite interesting. Requiring open data strategy as part of bid proposals. So I really like this idea in terms of making open data, keeping the openness of data in mind at the point of collection and not just at the point of publication. Awareness from politicians of open data, more open data searches integrated in standard search engines, and finally crowdsourced data to be integrated with public data. So I thought all of these were really interesting and important thoughts on what the future of open data might actually look like. So at this point, I would invite all of you to think about your aspirations for open data, and feel free to share those with me on Twitter. Again, my Twitter handle is @Mapadelphia. So what I hope all of this means for spatial data in particular is an increased availability of live data links fueling downloads. So instead of the need for data publishers to update their links, once per year, once per 6 months, the data download link is automatically updated anytime the live data is edited. So a more streamlined approach to data downloads. More APIs available so developers can build really interesting applications that utilize city data. Data designed with the intent to release, so essentially collecting fields that are important and writing metadata at the point of collection that supports the eventual release of open data. Data formatting meeting the needs of consumers. So for your casual data user, that might just be a viewer. For your analyst, that might be a data download. And for your developer, that might be an API. So essentially making data available in a multiple different selection of formats. So each type of data need can be satisfied. The geographic-based discovery of open data, like GeoBlacklight provides, the collection and maintenance of metadata by default instead of an afterthought, and finally, cities embracing visualization, analysis, and tools created by the public. So this is particularly noteworthy because I think a lot of agencies, and oftentimes transit agencies, just don't have the internal staff or funding to build really helpful transit applications. But if they make their GTFS data available, then developers can build some really great resources for the public, so they can actually have a transit application without the transit agency building anything. So at this point, I wanted to outline some ways that we can all take action as active members of the data community to ensure we have a bright open data future ahead of us. So my first question, though, is how do we achieve this data utopia? That's a tough question. I've kind of outlined 4 main tasks that I think will help us get there. Additional advocacy for data quality standards, formats, and metadata. So there's a lot of fantastic open data standards out there that helps to make sure that the data published by one city can be used with the data published by another city, as well as helps to make sure that, for example, restaurant inspection data can be easily compared and analyzed by the user. So I think that us as data consumers, the responsibility lies on us to make sure that we're advocating for and demanding proper data standards and metadata. Next is providing feedback. So when you download data or use an open data set in your project, it's really important to provide feedback on the quality and completeness of the data set, because I think in most cases the data provider actually reads those comments, and hopefully it results in the improvement of that data set. And essentially asking for open data platforms and initiatives from our elected officials. So Code for Philly partnered with a group out of Pittsburgh to ask all the government candidates their position on open data, and it was a really great way for the community to see a great great and easy to comprehend list of platforms relating to open data for each of the candidates. And then in Philadelphia for the mayoral race, Philly Tech Week, Philadelphia's online tech news journal, is organizing a mayoral forum that will ask mayoral candidates important technical questions about the tech scene in Philadelphia, and those will include questions about their stance on open data. So making sure we consider these important topics when we're voting and when we're choosing our elected officials. And build and showcase great projects. So I wanted to show this story. The application on the left is called Budget Bulldog, and it was created by a member of the Philadelphia tech scene. And essentially it was built from a right-to-know request about Philadelphia budget data. It was a really nice visualization of how different agencies spent their funding. And I think it showcased how important this data was to the public, because how easy this was to use and how searchable it was made it a really important tool to not only data experts, but also the casual data user. So just a few years later, the City of Philadelphia put out their own budget visualization app, and I'm not sure if they would have had quite the amount of motivation if there wasn't the kind of initial publication of this tool several years before. So the kind of final message I want to leave with everyone is be the open data viz you want to see in the world. And how do you do that? Well, step one is visit your favorite open data portal. So here's are just a few. And again, if you check out the slides, you can, all these are links, so you can get to these sites pretty easily. Next is download a data set or more than one data set that you've never worked with before. So because this conference was in San Francisco, I decided to visit Data SF and download restaurant scores, which is a pretty cool data set that I had never worked with before. So step three is analyze and visualize your data set. So I used CartoDB to make a pretty cool visualization of restaurant inspections. And this didn't take that much time, but it was a really interesting exercise in what kind of important fields exist in the data and what is worthwhile to visualize in this data set. And then provide feedback to the data creator of the quality and completeness of the data. So this is a great opportunity to tell the data provider what is useful in the data, what could be improved, what metadata is missing. And then finally, share your project at Open Future and tweet to your government or elected officials and tell them why open data is important. So in this case, I tweeted at Philadelphia Gov and let them know that it would have been really great if Philadelphia released restaurant inspection data and standardized it for publication like San Francisco does. And then I also shared the visualization. So hopefully they could see this project and be inspired and see the value of releasing this type of data for Philadelphia. So I just want to kind of hammer home the message that you too can build great things with open data. You don't need to be a developer. You don't need to be a super talented data analyst. If you can feel comfortable with an Excel spreadsheet or a tool like CartoDB, it's pretty easy to make some pretty interesting and impactful tools. So I wanted to share a few of those really cool projects that were built by colleagues of mine. So this is a pretty cool visualization of global oil reserves by my colleague John Brannigan. And the really nice thing about this is it uses Torque to show a timeline of these reserves. And you can actually explore this and hover over the timeline to see how the reserves change throughout time. And again, the link for this is in the presentation if you want to check it out. Philly Crime Mapper by Dave Walk. It's a really nice application fueled by the crime data that the City of Philadelphia publishes. And the nice thing about this is that data is updated every day. So the data on this map affects crimes that happened for the past 3 years up until yesterday. So this is a pretty cool app because it lets you define the geographic area that you're interested in. So you might not only be interested in one neighborhood or just one census tract. You can create a free-form boundary, and that will query all the crimes based on the timeline that you specify and the crime types that you specify in that area. This is a pretty cool, fun app to explore this data. And this is a Philadelphia land inventory by my colleague Catherine Killebrew, and essentially just brings together a lot of different open data sets like permeability, hydrology, land use, and building footprints to highlight opportunities for urban agriculture. It's a pretty cool, lightweight viz that's fun to play around with. It also gives you a sense of what Philadelphia, what the building infrastructure and environmental makeup of the city is. And I also wanted to highlight this really fantastic project called Unlock Philly. So essentially this highlights the accessibility of access for different transit stations in Philadelphia. And this is a really fantastic tool because it's crowdsourced, meaning it accepts live submissions of data accessibility. So if an elevator is down, that will be reflected in the website. And it also allows for routing. So it lets you determine which station points are accessible and how to get from point A to point B. And it also brings in additional layers such as businesses that are listed as handicapped accessible. So this is a really great tool. There might not be an economic viability to it, but it actually shows a really fantastic resource for the city and did not exist in any format before this. So that is it for the presentation, but before I wrap up, I wanted to thank the open data community that responded to my survey. I wanted to thank Mark Head's 2013 Ignite talk, which inspired me to think about how we as data consumers have a strong responsibility in the open data community and ensuring we have a bright open data future ahead of us. And finally, Azavia for giving me some feedback and support for this presentation. So if you have questions or you would like to discuss, please check out my slides at ph.ly/openfuture, or you can contact me via email or on Twitter at Mapadelphia. And I want to thank you all for listening to this talk, and yeah, I hope everyone out there does their part in ensuring we have a really robust and exciting future for using and visualizing open data. All right, that's it. Presentation over.
Thanks so much, Sarah. That was awesome.
Oh, thanks.